Hello, it is Monday, the 16th of January, 2023. Fortunate we are to have before us a sealed box containing an array of that fascinating endangered species known as LaserDisc. Now all that remains is for me to disembowel the box and liberate from it the treasures within.
Okay, so this box represents the last consignment of Laserdiscs that I bought online from Vintage Laserdiscs in South Australia, at least for the time being. I believe there are 40 Laserdiscs inside this box. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but we'll see how many I get through in this one. Right, so this is a 1990 Japanese Laserdisc from CBS Fox Video for All About Eve, the 1950 movie directed by Joseph L. Mankiewicz, who also scripted it. This is a really fantastic movie, and this is a really good looking Laserdisc. 1950, incidentally, was a particularly great year for movies. I mean, you had All About Eve, Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard, John Huston's Asphalt Jungle. What else was there? There was Louis Buñuel's Los Olvidados. There was two great movies from Akira Kurosawa. There was Scandal and Rashomon. Nicholas Ray's In a Lonely Place. That was 1950 as well, I think. So yeah, it was just all around a great year for movies, and this was one of the best movies that year. This is a devastating, sophisticated, and funny melodrama about the ruthless ambition in the entertainment industry. So it stars, it's got a great cast. Bette Davis plays Margot Channing, the aging Broadway star. Anne Baxter plays Eve Harrington, the scheming supposed ingenue who really insinuates herself into Margot Channing's life, and sort of threatens Margot's career and life. It's a really good performance. George Sanders as the sort of acidic theatre critic Addison DeWitt, Celeste Holm, Thelma Ritter, Marilyn Monroe in an early screen appearance for her. So this movie, it was a big box office success. I believe it was one of the 10 highest grossing films of 1950, and it was a huge. It got a lot of awards. It was nominated for, well, there you can see the winner of 8 Academy Awards. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay. George Sanders is the only actor in this who won an Academy Award. There were 5 acting nominations: Bette Davis, Anne Baxter, Celeste Holm, Thelma Ritter, and George Sanders. So 4 women were nominated for acting Oscars, and none of them won, which is a bit of a shame. But I mean, all the performances in this are good. I can't speak highly enough of this movie. I mean, if you're a film buff, you've probably already seen it. Immensely influential. It's been, I think there was a Broadway musical based on it, and it's sort of been referenced and homaged in loads of films that came after it. So great movie. I mean, if I had to be perfectly honest, I would say between this and Sunset Boulevard, I would probably, I think I prefer Sunset Boulevard, but it's a very, very thin margin. And I mean, why compare them? But they're both, I mean, Sunset Boulevard and All About Eve, they're both great, very biting takedowns of stardom, specifically, the psychology of aging stars. Although I think this one's a lot more sympathetic to its characters. This isn't a movie. This is from Warner Home Video from 1985, The Best of John Belushi. So this is a compilation of sketches featuring John Belushi from TV's Saturday Night Live. I do have a copy of this on VHS, and I'm pretty sure it was my introduction to a lot of the material from John Belushi's stint on Saturday Night Live. So John Belushi was one of the original SNL cast members, one of the not ready for primetime players. So he was on Saturday Night Live for its first 4 seasons. Between 1975 and 1979, he left after season 4, the same time as Dan Aykroyd. This is a pretty good release. It's sort of, I mean, some of the sketches still hold up pretty well. Some of them don't. I mean, most of Belushi's most famous SNL materials here. We've got, the Samurai, the Blues Brothers, the Cheeseburger Olympia Diner sketch, the Bumblebee, Little Chocolate Donuts, some celebrity impersonations, the Star Trek. What was it, The Last Days of the Starship Enterprise, the sketch with Belushi as Captain Kirk, and there's the Godfather sketch. So in the 1980s, there were a bunch of these best of SNL compilations that were released. There was one for Chevy Chase. There was one for Dan Aykroyd. And then later on, obviously, they started releasing more and more of them for the various other people that featured on SNL that became stars. I do have the first 5 seasons of SNL on DVD, and a few years ago, well, 6 or 7 years ago now it would be, I watched all the first 5 seasons. I binged my way through them, and it was really interesting stuff. There's a lot of stuff featuring Belushi that isn't in here. I think a lot of this edgier stuff isn't on here. I think that perhaps in the wake of Belushi's death in March 1982, there might have been a vested interest in really not depicting the more drug heavy sketches and stuff that he did. This compilation was actually produced by Belushi's widow, Judith Jacqueline Belushi. So this is a Japanese release, obviously. So Beverly Hills Cop, the 1984 action comedy starring Eddie Murphy. This is a Japanese laserdisc from 1985, released by CIC Video. Okay, so Beverly Hills Cop. This is one of my favorite movies. Sort of hugely successful. I think this was the highest grossing film of 1984. This is an example of the high concept film where everything just sort of, everything just aligned to make this movie a monster success. Eddie Murphy had been on Saturday Night Live. He'd been in, before this film-wise, he'd sort of had a breakout success in 48 Hours, and then he did Trading Places. And this was just like when Eddie Murphy was pretty much becoming the biggest movie star in the world. You had like a great premise, the streetwise, loose cannon, wisecracking cop from Detroit who goes to ritzy Beverly Hills to sort of solve his friend's murder, and like sort of runs afoul of not only of criminals but also of the more straight-laced Beverly Hills Police Department. This is just a great movie. You've got action, you've got one-liners, you've got a really popular soundtrack. So this is the movie that pretty much made Eddie Murphy a superstar. And you've got all the great supporting characters, Judge Reinhold and John Ashton as Rosewood and Taggart. You've got Ronnie Cox as Bogomil. You've got Stephen Burkoff as the villain, Victor Maitland. This is a great movie. It's it's an iconic 80s film. What more can you say? One of the very often cited pieces of trivia attached to Beverly Hills Cop is that it was originally supposed to star Sylvester Stallone as Axel Foley, which would have made a very different and I would say very much inferior film. There were disagreements between Stallone and the filmmakers, so Stallone sort of went off and put the ideas that he wanted to do in this into the movie Cobra, which was released in 1986, and Eddie Murphy played Axel Foley, one of his most instantly, recognizable roles. So the movie was directed by Martin Brest, and it was produced by Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer. Simpson and Bruckheimer sort of became, legendary shorthand for that sort of era of, coked up, action film movie producers. Another Japanese laserdisc. This one is a 1984 Warner Home Video laserdisc for Body Heat, the 1981 film noir written and directed by Lawrence Kasdan. So Lawrence Kasdan had some pretty high-profile screenwriting credits. He co-wrote The Empire Strikes Back, Raiders of the Lost Ark. He wrote Continental Divide, a sort of underrated John Belushi romantic comedy. So this was his Kasdan's first movie as director, and it's really good. It's a lot of critics were quick to spot that it's sort of heavily indebted to Double Indemnity, the 1940s film noir. So this one has William Hurt as a Florida lawyer who's sort of drawn into having an affair with Kathleen Turner as the femme fatale, Mattie Walker, where they plot to kill her husband, and who's playing who, etc. It's a really good film. It's quite kind of notorious upon its release for its unabashed sexuality. It's got a great John Barry music score, very very jazzy. Yeah, this is a really good movie. Early screen appearances by Mickey Rourke and Ted Danson, who are in this. Richard Crenna is in this as well. Yeah, so this is a really good film. I think it still holds up pretty well. I mean, we've seen there was a massive glut of noirish erotic thrillers in the 80s and 90s, but this is still one of the best of them. Interesting bit of trivia, well, interesting to people like me. In the very first episode of Cheers from 1982, the Barflies are having an argument over what's the sweatiest movie of all time, and there's movies thrown about like Alien, the galley scene in Ben-Hur, Cool Hand Luke, and at one point one of the characters suggests Body Heat, which is a pretty sweaty movie. And when Body Heat is mentioned, there's a cutaway to Ted Danson sort of smiling, which is a pretty neat in joke because Ted Danson was in Body Heat in a supporting role. 1987's Lethal Weapon, the Richard Donner directed action movie. This is a Japanese laserdisc from Warner Home Video. So Lethal Weapon, again, much like Beverly Hills Cop, a sort of like instantly recognizable 80s action movie that launched a franchise of films of varying quality. Lethal Weapon is really good. You've got the mismatched... it's kind of the archetypal buddy cop film, Lethal Weapon, with Mel Gibson as Martin Riggs, the unhinged cop that teams up with Danny Glover's Roger Murtaugh, the more straight-laced family man type, and then they get drawn into this plot involving drugs and criminals and nefarious activities and such like. This is a fantastic movie, written by Shane Black, of course. It's interesting because I think there's a popular conception of the Lethal Weapon movies as being very much action comedy, which to a degree it is, but it's sort of surprising to go back to watch the original Lethal Weapon, which is actually much less of an action comedy than I think popular conception would have it. It's actually very much a straightforward action movie. It's a lot more gritty, I think, than the sequels. The sequels did sort of lean a lot more into the I guess the wisecracking and the ridiculous elements of it. But the first film is actually still quite because you have Martin Riggs is very much a mad suicidal character. I mean, the movie does play a lot on his death wish, and the fact that the advantage that Riggs has over bad guys in showdowns is because he doesn't really care if he lives or dies. But yeah, this is a really good film. I always like rewatching Lethal Weapon. It holds up. I think it holds up remarkably well. In spite of what we now know about Mel Gibson, but otherwise it's a good movie. And Danny Glover, I mean, he brings such a fantastic grounded quality to this. He's sort of exasperated, but I think I think Danny Glover is very much the heart of these movies. And this was the first movie from 1987. There were further sequels. There were 3 sequels, and then there was a television series. Gary Busey plays the villain in this, or rather, he's the villainous henchman. The main villain is General McAllister, and Gary Busey plays his brutal minion Joshua. I'm pretty sure this is the movie that kind of reinvented Gary Busey's career and made him like the go-to guy for insane villains for a while. I think that persona sort of spilled over into his real life. I think maybe Danny Glover's one of the few guys in this movie that didn't turn out to be a raging madman in real life. This is a Japanese laserdisc from RCA Columbia from 1985 for Body Double, the erotic mystery thriller written and directed by Brian De Palma. Okay, this is a bit of a contentious movie, Body Double. I don't think it's really especially held up as one of De Palma's better efforts. It's sort of a very obvious... I mean, a lot of De Palma's films are sort of indebted to Hitchcock, and Body Double is very much indebted to Rear Window, where you have the character who's sort of drawn into this mystery by, I guess, engaging in voyeurism, like sort of staring across at what's happening in the building opposite him. So yeah, I really like Body Double. It's sort of, I mean, it's kind of, it's very much the sort of slick, sleazy, sort of pervy De Palma sort of movie, much like Dressed to Kill. So this is a film that De Palma made after Scarface. I don't think this one was actually an especially big hit, although yeah, it's I still think it's pretty good. I mean, it's got some flaws with it. It's kind of it is a kind of ridiculous movie, but it's got some good things in it. Craig Wasson is the star, the main plays the main character in this. He's sort of an interesting actor. He was in some pretty good movies. He was in the 1978 Vietnam War movie Go Tell the Spartans with Burt Lancaster. He was good in that. He was in Ghost Story in 1980, and he was in A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 in 1987, playing the sympathetic psychiatrist. And he was in this. I'm not really sure what he's done lately. He had a sort of a moment in the 80s, and then he just doesn't seem to have done much, at least not much much material that's as high profile as his earlier work. But anyway, Melanie Griffith is in this, a sort of an early early major role for her, as I think she plays Holly Body, the porn star in this. You've got who else is in this? Bradley Gregg's in this. Dennis Franz is in this. Yeah, it's there's a really good Pino Donaggio film score. It's a very it's a very De Palma movie, if that makes sense. There's a musical number, Frankie Goes to Hollywood, doing this song "Relax," which is always good to see. The sex and violence in this movie did incur a great deal of controversy, much as Dressed to Kill had done at 4 or 5 years before. In particular, the sequence where Deborah Shelton's character is murdered with the handheld drill. That was quite controversial. This film, it sort of lives on in pop culture infamy, because in Bret Easton Ellis's novel American Psycho, I think Body Double is Patrick Bateman's favorite movie. I think there are, if I remember correctly, there are passages in the book where he's sort of renting the movie from the local video store and watching it. Another Japanese LaserDisc from Warner Home Video. This is Elmer Gantry, a 1989 LaserDisc release of Elmer Gantry, the 1960 movie directed and scripted by Richard Brooks, based on the 1927 novel by Upton Sinclair. I really like this movie. A few years ago, I can't remember what started it, but I sort of went on this mad binge of Burt Lancaster films. I was just like watching as many films starring Burt Lancaster as I could, because I'd always liked Burt Lancaster, but I sort of belatedly came to the conclusion that he's Burt Lancaster is just all around fantastic. So I was watching lots of Burt Lancaster films. I had the DVD of Elmer Gantry and I gave it a watch, and it's a really good movie. I was somewhat surprised to learn that, despite the fact that this is a pretty long movie, I think it's 146 minutes. It actually adapts only part of the novel. I do have a copy of the novel. I haven't read it yet, so it's kind of it's an interesting movie. It's sort of like a satire of the industry of religious fundamentalism. Burt Lancaster plays Elmer Gantry, who is a sort of a traveling salesman, and he sort of falls into duping people with revival of old-timey Pentecostal religion. Gene Simmons is in this. It was nominated for a bunch of Academy Awards, this movie. Burt Lancaster won a Best Actor Academy Award for this. It is one of his best performances, and that's a career that encompassed a lot of really good performances. So yeah, very, very good gatefold release here. So yeah, Elmer Gantry. I do have to read the book sometime. I'm sure it's great. The movie certainly is. So this is a Japanese LaserDisc from 1985 for Amadeus, the 1984 film. It's released by Fuji, which I assume is the same company that makes the film and the cameras. So Amadeus. This is a big movie. It's a really good movie. Directed by Milos Forman, from the 1979 play from Peter Schaffer. So this is a big movie at the time. It still holds up really, really well. It's of course based on the fictionalized telling of 18th century Vienna, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart being undermined by the jealous Salieri, who's a sort of a middling composer who's sort of outraged that God has bestowed the gift of musical genius on a young upstart like Mozart. So yeah, this movie was nominated for 11 Academy Awards. It won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay. F. Murray Abraham won a Best Actor Academy Award for playing Salieri. Tom Hulce, who plays Mozart in this, is really good. He was nominated. He didn't win. So this is I think the original theatrical release of Amadeus was 160 minutes. There was a later director's cut on DVD, which is the version that I'm pretty sure that's the only version I've ever actually watched, which is 20 minutes longer. It's like a 180 minutes. But yeah, this is a really nice release. It's sort of like a gatefold, and it's very it just looks really good. So the film, the historicity of Amadeus has been sort of, criticized or called into question, but I mean, I think it's ludicrous because I mean, the film. I don't think the film purports to be a true historical, document. Like, I don't think the film. I don't think Peter Schaffer or anyone involved with this honestly thought that Salieri poisoned Mozart. I mean, it's just it's just a dramatic, variation, like a fictional story with historical characters. I mean, no different, I guess, than what William Shakespeare used to do. No one complains that Shakespeare's plays don't hold up to historical rigor, or maybe they do. I don't know. But anyway, Amadeus is a really good movie. Wonderful music, of course. You can't go wrong with Wolfgang Amadeus Goddamn Mozart. I think this movie probably was responsible for a spike in the music of Mozart popularity. But this is a wonderful film. Great set design, great screenplay, great acting, great music. Just it's just a great movie. I mean, I'm sort of down on the Academy Awards for I think all throughout especially the 1980s, when you had movies like prestige Oscar bait movies that were winning Academy Awards that maybe don't really hold up that well today. I mean, but Amadeus, I mean, I don't know if it was the best movie of 1984. It probably wasn't, but it's one of the few movies from that decade where I can look at it and say, yeah, well, that was the Academy didn't really step out of line naming this best picture. It is a really good movie. Akira Kurosawa's Dreams from 1990. This is a Japanese laserdisc from Warner Home Video. Okay, so Kurosawa is, indisputably one of the greatest film directors of all time. I love Kurosawa. This movie was made relatively late in his film career. So this was 1990. Kurosawa was, I believe, 80 years old when he made this. Although he was coming off an amazing creative run. I mean, he directed Kagemusha in 1980, Ran in 1985. He was still making great movies. Well into old age. So Steven Spielberg and George Lucas had a hand in helping get this made. And Martin Scorsese makes an on-screen appearance in this. So this is a really wonderful film. It's an anthology film. It's consisting of 8 vignettes, all based on dreams that Kurosawa apparently had. Scorsese plays Vincent van Gogh in a one of the segments in this. All of the segments in this are wonderful. I mean, there are a lot of anthology films that, because of their fragmented nature, some bits are better than others. It might not hold up particularly well overall, but there are good bits in it. Dreams is not like that. Every segment in this movie is great. This is really one of the best anthology films I think ever made. And why would it not be? It's made by one of the true geniuses of cinema. So yeah, Dreams, great movie. I do have the Criterion edition of this. Which is the version that I've actually watched. But it's nice to have this sort of very very lovely edition as well. Lethal Weapon 3. Okay, so this is another Japanese laserdisc from Warner Home Video. The movie's from 1992. This laserdisc is from 1993. So yeah, you can see Mel Gibson, Danny Glover, and Joe Pesci. Directed by Richard Donner, who directed all 4 Lethal Weapon movies. I like Lethal Weapon 3, but I got to be honest, I don't love it. The first 2 Lethal Weapon movies are pretty great. 3 and 4, not so much. 3 is better than 4. It's one of those movies where it's not, there's nothing really to fault. It just feels definitely like, another installment in a franchise. Let's just keep this. The money rolling in. This is the one that introduced Rene Russo into the series as Martin Riggs' love interest, Lorna Cole. Joe Pesci's in this. I think one of my problems is, I mean, it's always good to see Joe Pesci, and he is amusing as Leo Getz, but I don't know if there was really much reason for Leo Getz to sort of be a recurring character. I mean, he was really good in the second movie where he was more germane to the plot, but like they just sort of kept bringing him back just because at this point, you know, the series, especially in part 4, it'd become like a, you know, the traveling clown car where they just kept adding more and more supporting characters with every movie, and they all stayed and just kept reappearing. But yeah, it's an okay movie. It's a good action movie. It's kind of, a sort of a suitable 90s popcorn action movie to rent on VHS, and you know, sort of this, you know, it's an okay movie. This one, I think one of my biggest gripes with this one is that it kind of doesn't really it doesn't have any great villains in it. Like the first movie, you know, you had General McAllister and you had Gary Busey. The second one, you had all those really scummy South African criminals, you know, Jos Ackland and Derek O'Connor, and you know, you had diplomatic immunity and all that stuff. I don't really remember the villains in this one being especially memorable. I think the plot in this one, it had something to do with criminals sort of manufacturing illegal armor piercing bullets and stuff. This is a Japanese laserdisc from Warner Home Video from 1988 for Barfly, the movie directed by Barbet Schroeder, written by Charles Bukowski, starring Mickey Rourke and Faye Dunaway. Mickey Rourke plays, this is a sort of a semi-autobiographical film, and Mickey Rourke plays the Charles Bukowski's on-screen surrogate, sort of alcoholic writer. Golan and Globus's Canon Films was responsible for a lot of schlock, dreck, trash, cinematic amusements and abominations, especially in the 1980s. But every so often, Canon Films would actually release a good movie, and Barfly is one of them. So Mickey Rourke. He had a pretty fantastic run of movies in the 1980s. I mean, just off the top of my head, he was in Diner, Rumblefish, The Pope of Greenwich Village, Year of the Dragon, Angel Heart, Prayer for the Dying, and Barfly. So, you know, Mickey Rourke was in a lot of good movies, and this is one of them. This is a really good movie, despite the fact that it does feature Frank Stallone in a supporting role. I do recommend this movie. Oh, for God's sake. Okay, so this is the Amityville Horror, the 1975 horror movie. This is a 1985 Japanese laserdisc from Vestron Video. Okay, so the Amityville Horror, this is a kind of a corny horror movie. Enormously controversial at the time, supposedly based on a true story, of course. So in 1975, George and Kathy Lutz and their children moved into a house in Amityville, Long Island, and then after, supposedly because of malevolent supernatural forces and paranormal phenomena, they were forced out of the house after 28 days of living there. That was the basis of the 1977 book by Jay Anson, and the book then was adapted into this film. So the film, it's kind of, I mean, it's sort of, if you sort of watch it like as a sort of a campy, enjoyable romp, it's okay. It's not really, as a horror movie, it doesn't really stack up to, The Exorcist or The Omen. So you've got James Brolin and Margot Kidder play George and Kathy Lutz. Rod Steiger is in this as the priest, Father Delaney, who delivers an incredibly hammy performance. He really chews the scenery. In this one. So it was directed by Stuart Rosenberg, who actually has really good credits. He directed Cool Hand Luke, Brubaker, and The Pope of Greenwich Village. So this is kind of an odd movie for him. I think this movie was released by American International Film, so it wasn't one of the major studios. But the film, it sort of led to. I've lost track with just how many follow-ups there were to this, innumerable sequels. I have to be honest, I'm actually a much bigger fan of the first sequel, Amityville 2, The Possession from 1982, which is actually a prequel. I'm a much bigger fan of that movie than this one. But I haven't bought a laserdisc of Amityville 2 yet, but hopefully that'll happen sometime. The film does have a really good music score by Lalo Schifrin. Sort of employs a lot of like creepy sort of lullaby chanting. Some people have actually speculated, and not unreasonably, that when Schifrin's music score for William Friedkin's The Exorcist was rejected by Friedkin, he simply retooled that music for the Amityville Horror, some years later. Although Schifrin has denied this. Schifrin also did the music for Amityville 2. Yeah, pretty much any conversation I have about the Amityville Horror, I end up sort of invariably, talking about Amityville 2. That's just the way I roll. I think that's it for now. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I feel like I've barely made a dent in there. I guess there's still 28 more movies to rifle through, but that's for another time.